Good morning. You're listening to Central Wisconsin's 24-hour information station, AM 1320 WFHR. It's time now for the Morning Magazine, brought to you by Comfort Air Heating, Cooling, Plumbing. Now, with the Morning Magazine, here's Carl Hilke.
Thank you, Jerry, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's show on AM 1320 and streaming live at WFHR.com. We also welcome our friends at Wisconsin Rapids Community Media. Jesse's here, so you're going to find out that I do have a face for radio. And the reason he's here is it's time for our visit with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink, and he's brought along a special guest today to talk about some important items. But first off, we wanted to highlight a few items in last night's Common Council meeting. But first off, we welcome the Mayor of Wisconsin Rapids, Zach Vruwink. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Carl, and good morning to our listeners.
Okay. It's always nice to have a ceremony to start off your session. You swore in a new police officer, Cody Pataki, last night.
We did, and it was, I guess, significant about that situation is his father's an officer within the City of Wisconsin Rapids Police Department and has served admirably. But even before his father, his grandfather was actually a sheriff in Portage County. So neat to have a third-generation law enforcement individual join the city's ranks in the police department. And we know that Cody, in my conversation with Cody, he's got all of the read that his father has, and knowing his father a little bit, and I think it's going to be neat to have him join the police department.
So we welcome Officer Cody Pataki to the Wisconsin Rapids Police Department. There was a delay on one action that involved the final action involving agriculture products, the one we keep talking about.
Yeah, it's actually a little bit in Adam's wheelhouse, but we have talked about it a little bit on a past radio show, and that's the sale of agricultural products. There was a decision by the council last night to postpone that item until the city's representative on the Planning Commission is back. Alderperson Furkey taking some much-needed time off and was not able to be at our meeting last night, so the decision was to postpone that to our March meeting.
Okay. And then there was some action taken about something down the road from us here in the studio involving a housing development.
That's right, and that's the reason I brought our planning, our community development director, Adam Tegen, as the department's now officially known. It's still new to me a little bit. I catch myself saying the old name, but Adam had worked pretty diligently on pulling together an RFP for the property that we've talked about in your previous radio shows, and that's the 25th and Alton property, and that's just south of the station here on 25th Avenue. And really, the idea was that some time ago, probably 5 years ago, we went through an exercise, looked at all of the city-owned property throughout the city, and really decided, is it something we want to sell? Is it something we might want to sell, or is it something we don't want to sell? And kind of classified all these properties in those three categories, if I'm not mistaken. And so we that was one that we had identified as something that we should sell, and we don't have an identified use for it. There was thought at one point there would be a water tower there, but that has since been decided that it wouldn't occur there.
And there was like when before the Centralia Center was developed, that was going to be the new home of the Wisconsin Rapids Senior Center, and that went through.
That's right.
And so what are we looking at? An RFP is a request for proposals. So what did you have you gotten a response?
Well, what happened last night at City Council was basically approval to release the request for proposals. So over the next week or so, we will be working with the Home Builders Association and others in the area to get that proposal out. And then they have till the end of March to basically get those proposals back to the city.
So it could be a local builder that will come. It's open to anybody.
Correct. Yep. Open to anyone who has interest. Obviously, from the city's perspective, if we can get a local builder that's interested, that's great. Keep it local. But if it happens to be someone outside the area, but ultimately what we're looking for is some single-family development. What we've seen in the city is an increase in multifamily development, rehab of existing structures, but we haven't really seen a spurt in new single-family home construction. So the thought behind this request for proposal is how do we get that interest, and by the city owning the land, maybe we can keep the costs down and spur some of that type of development.
The neighbors in that area have always been very jealous in protecting what they consider the essence of their neighborhood. Mm-hmm. I mean, when they tried to put the senior center there, there was objections to that. The previous proposal for the housing that's going to be over by the Y. That was objected. Is there something that can get approval without a lot of objection in this neighborhood?
Well, I can't speak for how the neighbors will feel about it, but it is property that's zoned R2, which is 1-family and 2-family residential. So a single-family residential subdivision is in compliance with the zoning that already exists today. So there isn't a public hearing or a zoning process that needs to be followed. So the neighbors, although when they were objecting to the multifamily development, had stated that if there was to be development there, it should be single-family and should be complementary to what they have there. So we have tried to honor that viewpoint by going forward and pursuing a exclusive single-family residential subdivision there.
Do you think this will attract a number of proposals? I have J.R. Seward on my show once a month talking about real estate, and there's a heavy demand for housing right now, as we all know. About stuff that goes on the market is getting sold relatively quickly, or getting multiple offers. He talked about one property in our last program that had 9 offers on it.
Yeah.
And so, given that kind of a market, do you think now is the right time to pursue this, or that you can get some builders to have an interest in it and maybe build a spec or whatever?
Yeah, I definitely think the timing is right. Even just talking with realtors, we've heard the same thing. But what we did do a housing study in 2016, and what that indicated is there was a market that is being missed, and there is a growing demand for it, and that was single-family new construction. And really in the market of that 150 to 250 range, there hasn't been that type of construction, or there isn't a lot of that out in the marketplace right now. So when we again crafted this request for proposal, we're really trying to hit that sweet spot that is a gap missing in our housing inventory.
Now again, they have until when to file?
The end of March.
End of March. What happens after that?
After that, there will be a team at the city level that will involve multiple departments and potentially some of the aldermen that will review the proposals, basically go through a scoring exercise where we'll rank them based on, is it close to what the city envisions there? Are they going above and beyond? How much are they willing to offer for the property, for example? Kind of rate all those factors, and then we'll come up with a proposal. And then from that point, that recommendation would go through Finance and Property Committee, and then ultimately the City Council to be awarded.
I'm going to bring this up because it came up on Mike Zerflu's show on Monday. Someone asked about this. Mm-hmm. And he gave his take on what it would for him to invest in something like this, and basically like tax-free for a certain period of time. The impression was that the west side is not an attractive side for this type of a development or investment, at least from a developer's standpoint. What's your take?
Well, I mean, obviously everyone's going to have their opinion on what's attractive and what's not. Partially what drove this is where the city owns 8 acres. It's a wooded site. It has a small stream running through it. So it's a unique site that has the opportunity to be developed at a small scale. We're not asking for a 100 home lot subdivision. So really it's kind of a toe in the water, if you want to look at it that way. We haven't done this type of proposal before at the city. We're really trying to see, is there the market? I can't tell you that I'm going to get 100 proposals on this. That would be excellent. But if we get 1 or 2, I mean, that's a win, I think.
Okay. What if you get none?
If we get none, then it's back to the drawing board. We relook at the site, see if there's other potential uses that would be a good fit there. And then again, any proposal that would be different from this, we would run through the council and get their blessing on what route to go. You
mentioned you were grading and the sites, the properties that the city owns, on whether or not this is something we want to keep. What kind of criteria did you use in coming up with, we should keep this we should put on the market?
Well, really, it's, do we have a use for the property? Obviously, I think we have in the range of 200 some odd properties. Some are remnants from a road project that we had done. Some are a property like this that was probably originally purchased for utility purposes. So really going back and saying, all right, it was acquired for this reason. Do we still need it for that? If not, what other potential future uses does the city have for those? And if there isn't really a viable use, why are we holding on to it? Rather than us holding on to it, let's try and get it back on the tax rolls, build the tax base, and spur some economic activity.
Well,
A prime example was when Quick Trip bought the property at Lincoln and the Expressway. The city had a remnant left over. It might have been former railroad right-of-way. And when Mike Zerflu was selling his property, he approached the city to purchase it, and ultimately we didn't come to terms on it, but the developer happily purchased the property because they could use a portion of it for the development. So that's a case in point where it was really small, almost a triangular piece of property that many would think is just road right-of-way.
And I guess basically, in terms of, if we look at this from political ideology, this is a conservative principle. If the government has no use for something, why not put it back into the private sector and let them have it?
You've got
Exactly.
it. Yeah, and I think size is a consideration too. You know, this is an 8-acre parcel that it doesn't have. It's not near the core of the city, and when we think about smart land use planning, keeping our core services close to each other, so from an infrastructure standpoint, you're not building out all these things and having things scattered so they're inefficient naturally. Again, another conservative business practice that or government ideology that you want to maintain and maximize the total utility and efficiency of your infrastructure. And this is a case in point where we've got infrastructure running on 25th Avenue that can adequately serve the site, not to mention the fact that we can get some tax revenue off of it. But I think that's something that we look at is, are there utilities currently serving the site in some form that we're not maximizing? You know, our water and light utility, for example, could always use more customers. More customers ensures that our rates stay at bay, and the same goes for property taxpayers. And to the point about Mike's concern about wanting free taxes, no property taxes on this, you know, we deal with how many taxing jurisdictions. So
right.
We only control the city's tax portion, which is only a fraction of the overall tax bill. And so in that case, we'd have to create a tax increment finance district at that property. And the efficiency of creating that, unless there's some incentive that the property, some cost barrier that needs to be achieved or overcome, there's really no incentive for us to issue it at low or no tax. I mean, there's ways for us to achieve, I think, other incentives if the prospective developers are creative, which many of them are, right? They're doing housing subdivisions in the town of Grand Rapids, for example, off of 48th Street. You see Shane Roosh doing a lot of proactive, hey, I'm seeing a market opportunity here. He's being aggressive. He's also entering markets like Point and Marshfield. And I think it's those types of developers we'd love to engage on this project at a local level, because it's really within their scope of work. Mm-hmm. They're used to doing that. They're used to building spec homes or decent single-family homes. But to the point about the West Side, I think it's a shame that we hold this viewpoint that.
But it exists.
We do know it exists, but it's a shame because there have been how many housing developments in the last 20 years on 25th Avenue of its own, and they're all in the $100, $125, maybe $150, maybe $175,000 property value. And so to say that, well, we don't believe that anybody wants to build there, or, we shouldn't give it a shot, is kind of goes to the adage that Wisconsin Rapids has been known for, is not being willing to try things, not being willing to be proactive. And I think the city hasn't been as proactive over the course of the last 30 years on generating new home developments, right? There have been a few housing developments, whether they're on 14th Street, or the Rosewood subdivision off of Whitrock. I think we just need to, from a single-family home perspective, that's what generates the need and the demand for new businesses. Part of why the West Grand Corridor hasn't developed is because there hasn't been any new influx of income. That when people look at the market dynamics, if you don't have new home development, you don't have new incomes residing there, you're not going to open a business there. I mean, we always hear the pharmacy on the West Side, or we always hear the, you name it, the store, whatever the flavor of the week is. And the reason why some of that stuff has never materialized is there just hasn't been the income growth on the west side of the river, particularly west of the Riverview Expressway. So this is an attempt to create some demand on the demand side of the equation, ultimately improving. Now, I can't say for certain this is going to be developed or it's going to be developed this time around. It will at some point in the future. I mean, the city doesn't have a lot of contiguous parcels available for new developments. So I would say part of the reason why we've lagged the Plovers of the world is because we haven't been proactive enough about making available property for single-family home developments.
How many homes do you envision being built? If this happens, how many home sites do you think you can fit comfortably in that area?
Yeah, the city just did some very rough conceptual planning on it, and if you're looking at kind of a single cul-de-sac type layout, we're looking at anywhere from probably 12 to 15 homes. We're trying to keep them a little bit larger than some of the older lot sizes, aiming for a third of an acre or larger, so that they feel they'll still be in the city, have city services, but feel a little more suburban.
Okay. If you're just joining us on the Morning Magazine, welcome. We're getting our monthly visit with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink and Adam Tegen. I guess Community Development Director?
That's correct, yeah.
Community Development Director is here as well. So we have this going on. Mm-hmm. In the meantime, well, why don't we just go up the road a little bit and talk about the big project that's going to be happening downtown this year, and that is the repurposing of the mall, former mall, into the new home for the Southwood County YMCA and the Boys and Girls Club. How is the planning going for that from the city's viewpoint?
Well, since our last show, the Rapids Mall's doors have officially closed, right? And I think it was a bittersweet moment for our community to look at such an anchor and a fixture in the lives of people, right? You know, it was much more than just a place to shop over the course of its 40-year lifespan. But we also know that the world changes, and sometimes pretty rapidly. And here we are 40 years later, and we don't have a use for a shopping mall anymore. So I think it was certainly fortuitous and exciting to have a foundation and a project such as the YMCA and the Boys and Girls Club coming together to say, you know what, we don't want to see that building sit blighted and sit empty and sit vacant for years to come, as many malls have and do in the downtown or in the cities around the country. So it's exciting from that standpoint because there will be activity happening already the course of this year and with reconstruction and that. And I'll have Adam talk about kind of the process related to how the city approved the project and how that came to us. But I think from a community standpoint, it's on a major arterial, on a thoroughfare that it's a very visible property. So it wasn't one that, well, we'll let it sit there and see what kind of ideas come forward, and then maybe that'll come to fruition. You know, here was one that was financed. They're still obviously doing fundraising, but really was a feasible project for that site. And it's only going to use a portion of the site, that there will be additional property surrounding the actual YMCA development and Boys and Girls Club that will be available for commercial developers. So not to mention, it's not going to be all tax exempt. It's not going to be all a YMCA, but it will create, we believe, a hub for and new demand. As we talk about in the demand equation, it's going to create new activity, new people, new consumers for various businesses that may want to open in that vicinity. So I'll let Adam talk more on the process.
Okay, talk about the process, sir.
Right. The city's involvement is basically really on the land use side of things. It's an unusual project, obviously being the Boys and Girls Club, the YMCA, potentially the VA Center. So there's a mix of uses. So the city did approach it and approved basically the conceptual phase of a planned unit development for that property. That was done back in November or December, I believe. So we're waiting for them to finalize their plans, and then those will be resubmitted to the city for a final kind of a second approval process, and then that will be the zoning review that is necessary to get that project rolling. The city is also working last night as well. There is a development agreement approved with the YMCA and the Boys and Girls Club. The main context of that is that a portion of the Centralia parking lot on the backside of the mall will be deeded over to that project to support some parking for the potential new location of the VA. So that is moving forward. And then the city is also partnering with them to try and attract some outside funding from the state level for that project. We submitted a site assessment grant to the state WEDC about 30 days ago. That's potentially $150,000. The matching funds would come from the YMCA Boys and Girls Club, but that would help offset the cost of the demolition and any environmental assessment that still needs to be done on that property. So we're trying to help where we can. Again, going back to the mayor's point, it was a bittersweet thing. The mall was great when it was in its heyday. We were looking for an alternative use. When the city had done a study on the property, it basically showcased that there was too much retail out there in the community right now. A mall really was not a viable long-term use. So really trying to support a bird in hand, as it were. It's a project that came to the city, and we're seeing what we can do to make it a reality.
When do they plan on starting their demolition work this spring?
So you won't actually see, as far as I understand with schedule, you won't see much demolition happen until late summer or early fall at the soonest, because right now they've got to do a lot of, as Adam was talking about, their environmental assessment to ensure that beneath the structure, the foundation, there isn't any strong environmental concerns. Obviously, they're putting in a pool and a lot of subgrade work with that. They'll need to assess the environmental underneath there in case they have to do any major excavation. And, given the history of the site as a railroad bed and switching yard and things, it's unknown, right? I think in the 70s when the property was built, environmental regulations have changed, right?
Right.
So I'm not
and
sure.
I remember what it looked like prior to the mall being built. And I can remember all the different railroad tracks that went in the downtown. And you go to the Southwood County Historical Museum, and you can look at some of the old pictures of the city, and you can see what used to be there.
Yeah, it was an expanse. It was just a behemoth of a site that really didn't have a lot of utility. I mean, I'd love to see passenger trains back in here like the next person, but the reality is those days are not here anymore.
Okay, so given that, how long will it take them to build what they want to build? Have they indicated to you, and are you going to be further developing that site as they're doing their work? Are you going to be coordinating? I'm trying to envision what this work site will look like over the next several years.
Mm-hmm. Well, at this point, the city, we have been working on proposals to basically reconstruct the Centralia parking lot, again, on the kind of the backside of the mall, because that parking lot is failing, so we're looking at some different alternatives there. The city was approached for a senior housing development.
I was going to ask you about that
as well. That is, they pursued some tax credits through the state level, so there is no definite on whether or not that'll go forward until they hear a yes or a no from the state on that project. But that could potentially be ramping up in fall, winter of 2018 if that moved smoothly. So yeah, there could be multiple things going on there. But obviously, the city doesn't really want to take on the parking lot until we know if that senior development is there, so that we're not building something, tearing it out shortly thereafter. So there could be a lot of moving parts there. And then the city also is going to be partnering and working with the YMCA and the Boys and Girls Club really to figure out what that long-term vision is for those outlots that the mayor mentioned. The frontages along the expressway will not be developed as part of the reconstruction.
Okay, I'm just wondering, how do you envision that frontage where you got the subway and you got what used to be, I remember there was a number of buildings, other businesses. Now you got, I think, Tribune Media for the time being, but given what Gannett is going through, the reorganization and the like, you wonder how long that will exist.
Right.
How will that be affected?
So both of those properties will remain untouched, the subway and the strip mall, and then the bank that's on the corner. So the three of those will remain. It's the property south of there, right, between there and the foundry. So generally, the access to the YMCA will remain the same entrance, the primary entrance that people use the mall to come to the mall off of the expressway. So it's the properties currently occupied by the restaurant, the gas station, and the car wash. Those three properties, I guess, or two properties, will be one of the outlots that Adam talked about available for commercial redevelopment. I mean, we could have any uses there. Our housing, or our Rapids Mall study indicated that there is a housing need yet in the community, which it's likely that would be multifamily. You see a lot of malls getting redeveloped in a lifestyle center where there's housing on site. There's obviously some commercial space yet, businesses and kind of goods and services being sold, and then obviously things like the YMCA, more of a fitness use. Also childcare and things too. So you see kind of a lifestyle of services being met in a site. So that's an option. There still is a question related to hotel. We're about 100 rooms shy of hosting really some major conventions, and so I don't know. Might this generate some incremental demand that could move somebody decision into opening or building another hotel in the community?
There used to be a hotel in that area.
Yeah, right.
Dixon Hotel.
Yeah, and Hotel Witter down the street.
Yeah. So there's been hotels in that vicinity in the history of the city. So it would not be unusual, and it's what happened at the Point Mall. Correct me if I'm
right.
That became the site for Mid-State Technical College's new Stevens Point campus, as well as a hotel.
The Cobblestone, yeah. Very nice property, kind of a boutique. In fact, they have been in and out of Wisconsin Rapids, taking a look at the market. But yeah, there's a question on hotel. Might there be a need for a small boutique-style hotel that could add, obviously, to the quantity of rooms we have? There are a couple of properties that that we believe, are not quite the top tier. So if you're a visitor, you may not be staying at some of those properties. So we want to offer more choices when it comes to hotel, and that's another potential use. Obviously, restaurant remains, quick serve, fast casual food, fast food type of thing is another potential because of the traffic that'll be generated by the site. Those places obviously want to locate where there's a lot of traffic. Lunch and dinner crowd opportunities. So we really believe there's a whole multitude of options there, and we believe that the Y and the group there will be a good partner for us they want to see the site succeed just as much as we do, and so that made for a good partnership.
Well, as they pointed out to me when they came here to talk about that, I had both the Y and the Boys Club here to talk about, and they mentioned this is not unusual. There's a similar type development in Fond du Lac.
That's right. Right downtown. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so in fact, they kind of got some of their ideas based going over to Fond du Lac and talking to those folks. So.
That's right. Yeah, about 5 years ago, a group of us went over to tour those facilities, and it's almost ironic to have kind of come full circle now, landed on the mall site in the downtown, and plans very similar to what the Fond du Lac Boys and Girls Club and the YMCA did over there.
We have to take our first break. You're listening to The Morning Magazine on AM 1320 and WFHR.com. We also welcome our friends from Wisconsin Rapids Media here on The Morning Magazine.
Good morning and welcome back to The Morning Magazine, presented by Comfort Air Heating, Cooling, Plumbing. It's time for part 2. Once again, here's Carl Hilke.
Thanks again, Jerry, and welcome back, everybody, to today's show on AM 1320 and WFHR.com, as well as on your on the web at Wisconsin Rapids Community Media, or at your on your favorite public access channel on your cable system. And the reason why Jesse is here is we have Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink doing his monthly radio show, and he brought along with him the Director of Community Development for the city, Adam Tegen. Okay, we did. At the break, we're talking about the Y project. Okay, let's go next door. The foundry, the closed. What's happening with that?
Well, we heard that they were not going to rebuild one of their facilities after their fire. Adam and I had a conversation with them, kind of just assessing what their plans were, what might they do with the property, and we were made aware at that time that they were looking for a buyer for the sites. And Adam can talk a little bit about the group that did end up purchasing. But I know it's a site that has long been talked about. If we were to rebuild the city today, now knowing what we know, we'd probably site one of those foundries or both of them in a different spot, such as an industrial park. But this was a good opportunity for us to have that discussion and to really know what their plans were. So I'll let Adam talk about the group.
Yeah, and honestly, I would have to check to see if the sale has gone through, but I know there is a group out of the New York area who has been very interested in acquiring both properties. So they are putting the feelers out there. They are the type of company that will come in, basically clean up and improve the properties, and then look to turn around and sell them, ideally to a local interested party. So they do have their feelers out there. If there are people who are interested in either site, either the west side, which is right by the mall, or the east side, which is just north of the dam, they would be more than excited to hear from that. I do have their contact information, so
they could contact you and you can get them in. Okay, the phone lines are open at 715-424-2600, and we have our first caller of the morning. Good morning, you're on The Morning Magazine.
Good morning. Good morning. How are you with this sunny day?
It's great. You have a question for either the mayor or his guest?
I do.
Great.
I'd like to talk with the mayor, Zach Vruwink. Zach, this is your old art teacher.
Oh, hey Ruth, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing well, thank you.
I've got.
Thanks for listening.
school this afternoon, and altogether I have about 100 students a week over at Emmanuel, and I love every minute of it.
Well, great. Thanks for sending the art to the office every occasion around the holidays, too.
Yeah, and
Glad
I
to
would
see it.
appreciate being able to do that again this springtime. We have a lot of wonderful students over there, and we have a lot of good artwork, and we'd like to send some over to you.
Well, make it happen. That sounds great.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for your hard work, and please keep trying to get more industry into our area. It is very depressing to drive down A Street and also downtown and find all these vacant buildings, and we need something in there.
That's right, and that's what Adam and I. That's really our primary charge, and I think, I believe that a lot of that is the product of the downturn of the paper industry, right? When incomes left this community and a lot of economic spend left, but unfortunately, it's been a slow process, as you know, since that time when the downturn officially happened. We fully agree and share your concern.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, and keep going. You're doing fine.
Thank you very much, Ruth.
Thank you for the call, Ruth.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, so we got that. Then this move across the river to where the Labor Temple used to be. I still call it the Labor Temple site. That's what I remember, because that's where Pam and I celebrated our wedding.
That's
on
right.
the second floor. So there was kind of a mixed feeling when that building came down, but it had been, it was getting yucky looking. But what's the process now? We have a developer who's been in the process of putting together something. So why don't you give a little tutorial for our listeners? I think there's a lot of misconception or misunderstanding what's actually going on right now.
Right. So the history of the project has been going on for at least 3 years, which is when the city really began to acquire some of the properties that were on that block. The city had owned some parking lots and some vacant area out there, and then there was at least 2 of the buildings that were on the market. So that was kind of the impetus to the city saying maybe it's time to try and see what we can do to redevelop and improve this portion of the downtown. So over the course of those 3 years, we did acquire 3 buildings. Those have been removed. The environmental studies have been done to identify any contamination that exists on site. So any redevelopment, we know where we can go, what we need to do to avoid that contamination. And then we have been in contact with a developer out of the Madison area, Gorman and Company. They are very interested in the project. We're basically at the point where we have connected them with potential tenants for the commercial and office space that would likely happen on the first floor. We've gotten them in contact with potential tenants for the residential that would occur above. So they're going back and basically really refining their vision for the lot. They had put out there kind of just a very rough general concept plan, just really does show their interest. And now what they're doing is they're actually saying, all right, now that we know that there's a market here, what does that building ultimately look like? What does the underground parking look like? What does the architectural features of the building look like? And so they're working on that, and then we expect them to be coming back with that level of detail over the next couple of months. And that will be the council's next opportunity to review that and basically say, yeah, this is where we want to head, or you know what, maybe this isn't the right fit, and then we can
Reopen.
go back to the drawing board. But at this point, it's been very encouraging, and it does continue to move forward. The optimist in me says things can still fall into place where we would have a groundbreaking yet this year on that project to get that going and activity really starting on that.
That would be huge. I think that symbolically, that would be huge. Because I hear that from the business community. Enough talk. Mm-hmm. We need to get a shovel in the ground somewhere to show it. So I think that would be significant if that could happen.
And it's really balancing the appropriate amount of planning, right? You don't get a chance to redo these projects. So once you do them, they've occurred, right? And so I think that's been our challenge is we don't own the entire site. We'd like to own the entire site because we know that there will be a need for parking, and if we don't acquire the entire site, that will limit us in our ability to put underground parking in the site. So long term, as more businesses occupy the vacant buildings, as more residents decide to live downtown, as more people work downtown, there will create more of a demand for parking. And if you don't have parking solved, nothing else matters, right? You might as well not have another business open downtown because there won't be the available space for people that wish to park and walk to a certain business. So that's, I think, really been the planning side of things, is really making sure that we optimize the site. We optimize the square footage. It's not a very large site, so really making sure that we're being cognizant of the most potential. And so part of it is just property acquisition, right? And we're obviously motivated to get the shovel in the ground as the next person, as the business community likes to talk about with their projects, and this is no different. But it's a matter of getting the right planning in order and then ensuring that we can acquire the entire site.
Okay, now when they get done with putting their plan and saying, here's your project, this is what Gorman and Company, this is your project, when do you anticipate getting that?
That's, I think, what Adam was referring to over the next couple of months. Yeah, I mean,
so it'll be sometime this summer? Or?
Yeah, ideally, it could be as soon as April, May.
Okay.
So that's the goal.
Okay.
Obviously, they're a large company. They've got a lot of irons in the fire.
Sure.
Some had some deadlines in the late winter timeframe, and those have basically gotten wrapped up, and now they're kind of re-energized on our project. So we're hoping in that time frame we can get something before the council.
I think a big thing we're all looking forward to is, what does the rendering look like? If you were to stand at the street corner, what does that building look like? And I think that's going to be a time where you either going to win everybody over, or you're going to have a mixed kind of reaction to it, and that's what we're looking forward to internally, so we can provide some feedback and maybe steer some of the aspect of the construction. But we know that, from a aesthetic view, it's in the downtown, so it has to have some brick masonry construction, kind of an eye to the past construction methods. A lot of glass, maximizing the river views and the natural light that, and just kind of the aesthetic that glass brings to construction. So we're excited for that moment, and that's really what we're waiting for now. There's a lot of kind of technical details that people would get bored about in terms of who's going to pay for the building, how's the cash flow, and what the developer's paying for, what the TIF might be paying for, et cetera. But the rendering is, bar none, probably the most exciting thing that we're looking forward to at this time.
And then nearby is that one strip that you were going to be opening up and giving tours.
Yeah. The East Town Plaza.
East Town
Adam
Plaza.
can talk about the process on that, but that's another exciting one that's kind of on the heels of this development.
Right, yeah. For those of you familiar with East Town Plaza, it's basically a block away from the Triangle. It was a property that had been utilized as an office building since the late 1970s. It had been vacant for probably 4 or 5 years before the city acquired it. And walking through the building, there were a lot of improvements that were done that kind of took away the potential, quite honestly. It was very broken up. It was, you couldn't walk in and see what could be there. So the city got involved on it on a couple of levels. Basically, since we have purchased it, we have done some interior demolition on the property, taking out all the drywall, all the stud non-supporting walls that need to be there, really cleaning up the interior so that if someone's interested in redeveloping this property, they can go in and say, hey, I can see that residential would fit here or retail would fit there. We've also been working, there was some groundwater contamination under the building, so we're really trying to get the closure letter from the DNR on that as well. Trying to, again, remove barriers to development, make it easier for a developer who has the money, who has the vision to come in and really just get up and running quickly.
Do you have some interest? Have you got...
Well, that one is another one that we're going to be doing a request for proposals on. Again, opening it up to see what kind of interest there is. That will be going to the council in March to get that official blessing. So that document has been drafted. Again, the work has been completed. We're just waiting for that final sign off on the council before we start trying to generate that interest. Before
we go to break and let you get out of here and get back to work, what about the Aqua Center, the pool? Where are we with that?
So we're in the process where we're about 90% through the construction documents. So those are the documents that we turn over to prospective bidders that ultimately put in a proposal to construct the facility. So we have to get that done, and we had long said we want to get a design done and on the shelf, so that way when we do raise the money necessary to begin construction, we're ready. And at this point, we're still in capital fundraising mode for the $4.5 million, and we have not announced any major capital gifts at this time. There's one that may come through in the next 45 days, depending on their schedule, and we'll obviously share that when it's appropriate. But we're still raising the $4.5 million we need to effectively begin construction on the project. The challenge for us is we live in such historically low interest rate times, and for the city to borrow for this project, say in a year from now or even 2 years from now, interest rates will have doubled from when we first borrowed for the project last year. So it's going to cost us more to construct this facility as time goes on. So we believe timing is of the essence for individuals and benefactors to say, we want this to happen. We want it to happen in the most cheap way possible, and to maximize not only the taxpayer dollar, but also the private donations that need to happen to make it a reality. So that's the one piece I would mention that we haven't really talked about, is the cost to borrow the money is at historic lows. And if we wait, that cost will double. And in fact, it has almost already doubled since the first time we borrowed for it. So the City Council is going to be discussing in March whether or not they're going to borrow the second half of their portion, so the other $2.5 million or so. They borrowed the first portion last year, and I believe it makes the most fiscal sense to borrow for it. If the project doesn't happen, we can use those proceeds for other projects that we would already be borrowing for, like we borrow annually for street reconstruction, for example. So we could use those proceeds to fund some of those other priorities. The reality is, it's cheap to borrow money now. Why wait if we know the community wants this asset and this feature? It's a matter of encouraging and inviting donors to step up to help make it a reality.
With that, we'll take our final break. You're listening to The Morning Magazine. 14 at AM 1320. Welcome back to our final segment of the magazine with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink. I might as well ask you this with that ice tour. I mean, this has been a weird winter. Mm-hmm. And what has that done in terms of both city crews, your costs involved? And I know the main roads are okay, but the side roads, ice and snow, but especially when you get ice, it screws up everything. So
it makes everything a big skating rink, right? The budget hasn't been out of whack in comparison to other years. There's been, there haven't been a tremendous amount of major snow events. We budget for a variety, both minor snow events, which are those real couple-inch snowfalls, and then a couple of major ones. So I would say the budget hasn't been impacted more so or less so than other years. But the ice obviously is very difficult to deal with because you spread salt, and oftentimes if it's too cold, the salt doesn't activate, or frankly it bounces off the roadway right in the curb area, so it isn't as effective. So we've been using kind of a salt sand mixture, and obviously the residential streets got that treatment yesterday, and I think the schools did the right thing as a precaution, because the sidewalks and things is for those that are walking to school really were in tough shape. And so I think
what's this going to do for street maintenance in the spring?
Well, I'm not sure if it's going to have major impact, any different impact on that other than the freeze thaw. It really wreaks havoc on street surfaces.
Okay, let's get back to the phones, and you're on the Morning Magazine with the mayor. Good morning.
Guys, good morning, and thank you. And boy, it sounds like we've got a lot of projects, and it's going to be kind of scary, and yet I'm sure pretty exciting for everybody. But on the lighter side, can you just give me a little history how we have our plows with Snoopy on the front of it? Was it an artistic project, an art project from one of the schools? But our plows have, our snow plows have Snoopy on one, and then the other one had something I couldn't read because he was going by. But what developed there?
Yeah, well, thanks for the call. We haven't talked about that. Actually, the thanks for the call. The Public Works Director and actually the Street Department Public Works Superintendent were approached by schools, the Catholic school system actually here in town, about painting the plows, and it was kind of a lighthearted project, as the caller said. It was kind of fun. So we painted actually, I believe, 4 plows, maybe 6 when you count all the plow attachments that are on these. One is I think a great big tiger. So when the plow is up in the air, the paw is up in the air. It's really kind of funny you catch them, your eye catches, and
the kids came up with
the kids. Yeah, came up with the design. There was a Green Bay Packer themed one. There's Snoopy, as the caller said, as a lion. I'm trying to think of some of the others, but really creative way to kind of bring life to what the city does, right, on a seasonal basis. We're surprised that the paint has lasted. We were expecting that after a snowplow hour or two, the paint would be gone.
Did the kids do the work? Or,
yeah, the kids and the art teachers at Assumption Catholic Schools. So we actually held an event and a great big photo at Our Lady at St. Mary's. And so if you jump on my city Facebook page, you'll be able to see all of the plows lined up with all the kids around the plows. It was pretty neat. I believe Tom's Paint here in Wisconsin Rapids donated the paint to make that happen. So it was really a community effort to recognize the kind of fun that can happen around the season.
Well, congratulations, kids. Way to go. Obviously, the people have noticed that something else that's going to be happening hopefully soon. Weather will warm up and ice will melt and people can get their bikes going again. And we have a bike share program.
Building on the success of the River Riders Bike Share, where over 700 trips were taken by community members and visitors alike. It was a free bike share. It was no frills, low tech. It was very successful. They came with a lot of challenges, though, and so it really gave us a toe in the water to what a lot of communities, many larger actually, have, and that's a full-on bike share program where they've got docks throughout their community where people can walk up and rent a bike. So thanks to a generous community donor, the city will be launching 6 bike share stations throughout the Wisconsin Rapids area come spring. And so the community is going to be asked their input on where we should site these things. But because you rent them via your smartphone, we wanted to intentionally make sure that it was equitable and fair. So everyone that, irregardless of their ownership of a smartphone, could still rent a bike. So one station will be for sure sited at McMillan Library because there are computer stations in there and people can go in and rent a bike from the computer station. So it really leverages the great asset we have in our trail system and obviously promotes healthy living and active lifestyles, all the while making another avenue for visiting guests an opportunity to enjoy what our city has to offer. One thing that I hear when I greet conference goers to Wisconsin Rapids at the meet in particular is, what is there to do outside? We spend a good portion of our day in conference sessions indoors. We want to get outside. We know you've got a riverfront. We know you have some of these amenities. We want to get out and use them. And having a bike share program will further, I think, add to our amenities when conference planners are selecting communities to hold conferences in. So essentially it'll be 5 bikes at each station so people can walk up and rent a bike. And there's going to be some ADA accessible bikes as well, and you'll be able to see them kind of driving around town. You can rent them for an hour or half hour. It's going to be a nice. The uses are quite robust in terms of options. Very
popular, I know, in a number of communities. With that, what can you give us in terms of an update on the update of the trail as it is on the east end of the Expressway Bridge, that project?
The good news is we opened our bids on February 6th for the basic trail and riverbank stabilization, starting at Demetz Park all the way up to the former Elks Club site. And the good news is any day now we should be getting our DNR permits. And as soon as we get our DNR permits, we can award the bid to the contractor to proceed. So in the next 30 days, we expect the DNR will finally have their permit turned around. Frankly, we should have received a permit last fall, and we raised the alarm all the way to the top ranks of the DNR, and finally in late January they called a meeting and said, all right, there's something that happened here with your permit. So that was really frustrating, but the good news is bids came in. The low bid came in at budget. It didn't come in under budget, so there are things like the restroom and the lighting in Demetz Park that we're going to probably forego at this time because the general bid came in at budget, and so that'll be that'll get underway probably within the next 60 days. I'm not sure when the contractor's scheduled to begin once we award the bid, but that'll happen over the course of the spring and throughout 2018.
Okay, so it'll be fun to watch that. Yes. Develop. And there's, again, a shovel in the ground, something.
Finally.
Yes.
We've all been waiting. And as the caller said, there's a lot of projects. And I know internally there's a bit of fatigue sometimes because a lot of planning and details go into these things. But I can't commend the team enough for sticking with us and making these things happen because it does require kind of an internal pep talk for each of us to keep moving and get to the finish line.
Okay. Well, there's going to be a lot happening, the bottom line, and I guess a lot to talk about in this city going forward. Anything else before I let you go?
The one thing that Adam didn't mention is last year was a record year for permit activity in the city. And I think, in terms of indicators of where the economy in Wisconsin Rapids is at, the one caller about industry and that, that's a portion of it, is what are we doing to diversify the local economy? Part of it is how are we reinvesting and spending in our own community? And I think an indicator, as Adam will attest, that the quantity of permits and the sheer volume, we had $75 million of permitted activity last year. That is no small amount of change that's moving hands in this community. So it's an exciting time to be a part of this, and appreciate the caller's attention this morning, and have a good rest of your week.
Okay. Well, thank you, Your Honor. And we'll talk again next month. And that's going to do it for our monthly visit with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink here on the Morning Magazine, which, as always, has been brought to you by Comfort Air. We also thank Jesse for being here from Wisconsin Rapids Community Media. You can catch the video of this on their website, a very fine website, and also on your local public access channel on either Spectrum or Solaris. Check your channel listings for that. And that's going to do it for today's show.